Hello, and welcome to NTN Studios as we bring you information to edify, inform, and engage you as St. Lucia combats this devastating COVID-19 pandemic. This is the road to recovery. Today we discuss the St. Lucia Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan, moving from pandemic to recovery with collective action. I'm your moderator, Glenn Simon, Communications Officer with the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council. The Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan is the third of government's three-pronged response strategy to combat the COVID-19 pandemic and seeks to chart a comprehensive roadmap for St. Lucia's recovery. No segment of our country has been spared by the continued assault of COVID-19. Loss of household income and job security have now thrown many St. Lucians on the breadline, and many businesses were forced to close their doors. The island also witnessed a rapid collapse of the tourism industry and the domino effect that followed. The St. Lucia Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan primarily seeks to achieve the following 6 objectives aligned to 6 pillars. 1, to curtail the impact of both global and domestic economic contraction on the economy. 2, to drive economic activity through the deliberate commencement and continuation of public sector capital projects. 3, protect the poor and most vulnerable segments of the population and mitigate further deterioration of their quality of life. 4, to accelerate reforms that will build the resilience of the private and public sectors. 5, strengthen healthcare systems to respond to further health outbreaks and improve resilience in our health system. And 6, build St. Lucia's resilience to natural disasters and hazards through climate change and disaster risk mitigation strategies. Quite an ambitious but necessary plan. Today, our panel will provide clarity on 3 recovery pillars, the first 3 of the 6 pillars contained in the Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan. They will discuss who will benefit, the projected impact of the plan, the time frame for delivery, and the offerings contained therein. Allow me to introduce our very resourceful panel. Let me start from my immediate right. We have Mrs. Sabina Valmont, President of the Southern Business Association. Mr. Tommy Descartes, Chief Economist in the Department of Economic Development, Transport and Civil Aviation. Mr. Janai Leos, and he's the Chief Economist in the Research and Policy Unit in the Department of Finance. And Mr. Vincent Boland, he's the Managing Director of the St. Lucia Development Bank. So we have a lot to discuss today. This is quite a bit very ambitious, as we indicated. But before we start off, let us just set the stage. Some people may not know who you are in terms of, they heard your names, they may know generally who you are, but tell me something about yourself and allow our audience to know a little more about you. Let me start from the writers.
Good evening, viewers, and thank you so much, Glenn. Thank you, NTN, for having us, and I am very pleased to be here with this esteemed panel of experts as we discuss the Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan. My name is Sabina Valmont. I am the founding president of the Southern Business Association, and I am here having taken part in the planning process for this Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan. And I was also asked to say something else about myself. So like I told Glenn, I'm an avid island beach girl. Yesterday was officially the first day of summer for me.
Oh, very good, very good. And when I saw you on the program last time, I was so happy with the fact that the South, the perspective of businesses in the South were brought under the radar, under the microscope by yourself.
Yes, absolutely, Glenn.
So we go on to Tommy.
All right, thank you very much, Glenn. It's a pleasure to have me here today to discuss the Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan. In terms of something about myself, I am a former national cricketer. I often, when I see Darren Sammy playing, I often kick myself. You know, I perhaps would have been in the IPL somewhere, you know, and making these millions. But I chose otherwise to go into economics, and I have to deal with the task of trying to help St. Lucia recover during this very difficult time. So, so that's good night to all, and I look forward to explaining and as much as possible about our Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan here.
So you ready to bat?
I was an all-rounder, so I normally don't open the baton. I come in the middle order, you know, so maybe lower down the line.
Well, excellent. And Janai, You know, I always said Jenai has one of those voices that the media needs to buy into. This just love the resonance of his voice.
Thank you very much. I'm not the opening batsman, but I would try to assist in explaining the different policy pieces that have been put on the table. I know persons have quite a bit of questions with respect to how would I benefit from this plan, when will it work, how can I access some of the items mentioned there. So we're really hoping to shed some light, shed some clarity on the issues raised. So as you would have indicated, my name is Janai Leos. I'm the Chief Economist in the Department of Finance and an avid economist and data analysis enthusiast.
No rock climbing, nothing?
No rock climbing.
And Mr. Boland, I mean, I always saw you crossing the road. I never got to meet you personally, so it's nice to see you meeting you in person, because my wife works across from Bank of St. Lucia, so I normally see you moving across from SLDB to get to your vehicle. But now I have seen you, let me hear a little bit more about you. Probably there's cricketing in your past as well.
Thank you, and good evening to all the viewers. Actually, I was a former national volleyball player. No. I work with, I've managed the under-15 football team up until last year, the year before. I'm happy to be here because it allowed me to put the St. Lucia Development Bank into perspective in the role it is expected to play in the economic recovery, and also to allow persons to learn about the exciting things that the Development Bank has to offer now. So, we welcome the opportunity to be here to explain. One caveat though, Glenn, is that, it's a work in progress. Yes. A lot of the things that we are doing, we have come up with the policies, we have had consultation, so now it's, the work in progress is the details are being rolled out. Excellent,
because this is not prescriptive, and it will change as St. Lucia starts doing even more recovery. We build resilience and we see the gaps and close gaps. So let's start off. The coronavirus has been hailed as one of the biggest health and economic crises to affect the entire world. As Chief Economist in Research and Policy Unit, how did the coronavirus affect government's finances?
Well, what I would like to say is that this really is one of the deepest, broadest, and most significant economic contractions in recent history, to put it into perspective. So something like this, of this magnitude, has not been witnessed in the recent past, and the government has really been affected on a multiplicity of fronts. In the first instance, you have revenues being negatively impacted. In the second instance, you have expenditures now having to go up in treating with both providing the quarantine facilities for persons and actually putting the infrastructure to treat with COVID. So you have the candle burning at both ends, so to speak. And we also recognize earlier clock that this economic contraction will be at least 10 to 15%. And what we wanted to make sure was that your poor, your vulnerable, was definitely taken care of, and that you had policy responses to treat with those persons. And we also wanted to put in place some infrastructure to treat with your businesses and what have you, who are important in the recovery phase going forward. So it's really been a two-pronged approach where you're looking to assist the poor and vulnerable, you are looking to incentivize behavior where possible, and you're also looking to sort of lay the infrastructure that can allow us to rebound, which is why you are seeing the St. Lucia Development Bank, you are seeing the Department of Economic Development, and you are seeing representatives from the private sector at this panel. So these are really the three prongs that we are working towards sort of having success on all three fronts, because these are the three fronts that have been impacted by COVID-19.
But Tommy, I know you, the social aspect is very close to you. The second prong of this in terms of stabilization, tell us a little bit more about why government had to do this and leading up to the recovery plan at this time.
Thank you very much, Glenn. As John, I would have indicated, the economic impact of this is unprecedented, and from the local perspective, we saw the closure of hotels, and that would have come about as a result of strict protocols. The government would have instituted these closures in terms of and social distancing protocols. Obviously, people are now would be dislocated and displaced, and therefore you've had a significant amount of persons who would have now have lost income. And so essentially the government would have had to now quickly move in and sort of provide that sort of income support to households through the NIC, obviously, and also the government had its own for non-NIC contributors.
Yeah.
And so, so the social aspect realized, well, once you started with your public health response, but obviously there are consequences to these because there's a sort of a trade-off. You are now shutting down your economy, you're both on the supply and demand side. And now you have persons who are not working, businesses are closing, so the government now has to come in. And so hence the move towards a social stabilization plan.
Have persons started benefiting under the social stabilization aspect of it in terms of the non-NIC contributors? Because I know that there's been a lot of debate as to when it is going to start and persons not receiving it. But is there good news on that front?
So I think the latest information was that as of Friday, in discussions with the Ministry of Equity, the payments were made. And I know Jenna has been working very closely with the Ministry of Equity on it, and he perhaps could. But the latest information was that person started to get payments. And I think what the government did was, given that there was a late start, and I must say that, you know, while implementing these policies, there will be teething problems. Yeah. It's almost, I would say this is akin to having to repair a plane while the plane is in mid-air, in a sense. And so, you know, persons need to understand that there are challenges, and what the government did was to pay lump sums. So instead of getting the 500 monthly, they paid 1,500 at the end of June into July. So we're hoping that it came at a very timely period in terms of school books and so on. But perhaps Janai could maybe elaborate a bit more on that.
As Mr. Boland mentioned in his opening, that, you know, this is, you're going to have changes, you're going to have things that'll unfold. So, Sabina, how did the private sector cope? How are they coping? Are they starting to do any recovery already, or is it that COVID-19 is still something that is confronting them heavily?
Absolutely, Glenn. In the beginning, I think what we saw in the beginning still applies for many private sector firms. Now we are actually beginning to see the real impact, because in the beginning, when this whole pandemic started, it was very difficult to measure exactly what the impact would be on businesses. As of now, people are beginning to report that, you know, my business has not reopened, and that is so for various reasons. You have, for example, businesses that depend solely on the tourism industry being open and being viable. And for these people, like car rental agencies, like tour operators, alternative accommodation providers, they depend on the tourism industry. So for as long as it'll take the tourism industry to rebound, to get back, you know, to where it was before COVID, that is how long it is going to take those businesses to be able to see some kind of improvement. We have, you know, businesses being affected in exactly what you would expect, that once there is a limited amount of cash flow coming into the business, then people are having difficulty in being able to pay obligations like rent and salaries, and so employees have to be sent home. And so that is why the private sector is very, very pleased with what the government did as far as stabilizing to ensure that there was income support for even people who were not NIC contributors.
Wow, that's a real vivid picture that you've painted.
For sure.
And as you mentioned, the economic impact and finances, Mr. Boland, it leads me to ask how this pandemic has affected the banking sector, because you have persons unable probably to pay their obligations to the bank, and the banks now having to probably tighten up. Would you be able to speak on that?
Well, I know the president of the Bankers Association elaborated on this not too long ago, that the banks, having had to provide moratoriums, what you would have seen was the impact on their cash flows. Particularly like the Synergia Development Bank. We depend on funding from the government and various agencies to be able to execute our mandate. And then the funds are repaid via the loans that persons pay. But with giving out moratoriums, we definitely saw a contraction. I would have thought at least a 25% contraction in our cash flows that were during, now we're seeing it leveling back up. But the impact for us was the volume of persons that we saw being impacted, the number of moratoriums that were requested, and now the eagerness to see, okay, what happens next and where do we go? And that's why we welcome this panel discussion, the policies that are being rolled out.
Yeah. And the opportunity to inform persons of how serious this is. Because as Jenai mentioned, we might see almost a 10% decline. Persons may not understand what the 10% is. So I guess at some point you may indicate how serious this is for us. But if we move on to the plan itself, from all accounts, it took quite a bit of work to put this economic recovery and resilience plan together. What was involved in putting it together? What stakeholder consultations did we have? Is this something that the government put together on its own, or was there really widespread multi-stakeholder involvement? Tommy, will you be able to tell us anything
yes,
more
Glenn.
about
I think the fact that we have 2 persons from the private sector here is also already testimony that this was not just a government-led initiative. But to put in context, I think the Prime Minister would have convened or given instructions to the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development to start to convene a multi-stakeholder committee to look at the potential recovery recommendations that he could put forward. And so that would have been convened by the PS of the Ministry of Finance. And we convened a meeting with a number of stakeholders from the Bankers Association, from the trade unions, the tourism sector, manufacturing sector. So a wide cross-section of persons were involved in this process. And in the plan, we actually acknowledge these individuals and the organizations that they represented. The plan, when we met with them, we developed a six fees or 6 thematic areas, and asked persons whether they were in agreement with these, and we got agreement from them. And then we would establish this sort of subcommittees to start the ideation process and for recommendations. After that, obviously these are recommendations. We had to now go back internally, do the assessments, and particularly under Pillar 1, which had a lot of fiscal measures. I know Jenai and his team at Research and Policy did a lot of assessments to see how viable these were, but also whether they were in line with what we were trying to achieve, which was recovery in the short to medium term. Once that was done, we would then we went back to them and presented to them, and ultimately we would have presented to the Cabinet of Ministers and for their sanctioning, and then we would have put the full document together. Some of the recommendations would have come from organizations writing directly to the Ministry of Finance. For example, I know in the case of the Bakers Association and other associations would have written, making recommendations. So coming out of that, we had 32 interventions that we have put together. Quite an ambitious one, but this is essentially the process that was involved in putting this plan together. And so yes, it was quite consultative.
Multi-stakeholder involvement and everything.
Yes.
Sabina, were you happy with the process that government went through from a private sector perspective?
Absolutely, absolutely, Glenn. I will tell you, I was just reminded by Jenai just before we started that this entire process, the planning and the virtual meetings via Zoom, took us about 6 weeks from meetings with the various committees, then the technical team putting everything together, presenting to the Cabinet of Ministers. If I can speak for the private sector, I think engagement on the part of the private sector was there. It was very high. We had a lot of private sector personnel interacting and serving on the various committees, providing recommendations, discussing what we thought would work best and how it is we thought that the government could support private businesses during this time. So I think from the perspective of the private sector, we are extremely pleased at how the planning and how this entire plan came into effect.
Jenai, I know that probably you got 1,000 recommendations, but it had to be squeezed down and narrowed down. How difficult was that? Or were you able to squeeze in most of it to satisfy all the stakeholders involved?
I think what we recognized was that there really were scope to look at this sort of in 3 tranches, as it were. You have sort of your short, medium, and sort of your long-term recommendations. Because a lot of persons in the initial discussion spoke to how can we reposition the economy? How can we diversify the economy? Let's say diversify away from tourism. And if you are doing that, what are the areas, what are the resources required to achieve that? But we had the immediate issues of how do you treat with such a massive shock in terms of the number of persons who have been dislocated and what have you in the immediate term. So we recognize upfront that there was a need to sort of look at your more immediate measures and differentiate slightly to your more medium to long term. So the measures announced in this plan really speak to your short term, your medium term measures. I know one of the things that came up during the discussion was that this sort of forum and platform needs to be continued going forward as we flesh out some of the more longer term structural issues. So it was quite an iterative, quite a tedious process, but we also had to weigh what the government could have afforded that would yield maximum impact in relative short order. So I think providing income to those persons who have been adversely affected, and also working towards building out modalities to offer your business community access to finance were some of the two critical aspects we saw that were necessary in the short term. So a lot of the elements in the plan really speak to those short to medium term, but there would obviously be an iterative process towards some of your more long-term positioning issues.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So we go to our first break, and we haven't actually started delving into the plan. So when we come back, we'll actually be dealing with the aspects of the plan. We're dealing with the first three pillars. And when we come back, we continue our discussion on St. Lucia's Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan. Back in a moment.
Overnight, growing national unrest.
Society, a digital cashless society, one world currency.
A vaccine for COVID-19.
Midtown
Throughout the coronavirus
virus, Macy's iconic flagship
virus, the coronavirus.
Everybody vaccinated.
On the corona pandemic.
The opposition to the lockdown.
An infected
Conspiracy theories
about the coronavirus.
bizarre claims.
The truth about the origin of COVID-19 hidden from the rest of the world. And the Chinese.
In this constantly changing environment, resulting in sensory overload, cut through the noise and tune in to the National Television Network, the official source of information, all facts.
Welcome back to our discussion on St. Lucia's Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan. We actually go now into the plan itself, and we want to know what is in there for persons to benefit, when will they be able to get those benefits, and who exactly qualifies. So, Janai, we start off the rolling with you. And Pillar 1, tell us what is the thought process behind Pillar 1 and what it's supposed to do, and some of the benefits that persons can expect.
Okay. The first pillar is really speaking towards two cohorts of persons. You have your poor and vulnerable, and you also have your business community as well. And as Ms. Varma would have mentioned, when businesses are in a position where there is limited revenues, limited cash flows coming in, your fixed costs, your rent, and what have you, and your salaries, these are issues that now either result in you foregoing on that rent or laying off persons. So Pillar 1 really speaks towards what can be done to incentivize landlords and what have you to offer some sort of assistance to their tenants with respect to rent. It also speaks to the poor and vulnerable as well in terms of the electricity assistance program, and as we go on we could probably discuss that a bit more. So there are elements in there that speak to how can you offer assistance to the poor and vulnerable, and how can you offer assistance to your business community as well, because both are critical as you sort of lay that foundation to rebound and rebuild. In Pillar 1, you also have at least two initiatives with respect to providing financing to your micro, small, and medium enterprises as well. So Pillar 1 is focused on your business community, it's focused on your poor and vulnerable, and it's really sort of laying the groundwork that to the extent that you are able to stabilize those two cohorts of persons, that can lay the foundation for the resiliency and the moving forward that we speak of.
And it's really meant to jumpstart, as I said,
Yes.
jumpstart the economy.
Yes.
And the SLDB will play a very major role in on the policy intervention number 2. And we mentioned there are about 32 interventions with the provision of blended loan grant support to MSMEs with a focus on food security and adoption of digital technologies. Can you explain how this will be rolled out, Mr. Bonan? I think persons will be excited about particularly the grant aspect of this as well.
Sure. I think, you know, I'd like to just, before we jump into that, maybe just take a little step back to understand that the Central Development Bank, we have just completed our strategic planning. Our board is just about to approve the final document. And so everything is coming at an opportune time where we ourselves are sort of re-gearing our approach. The COVID response, where we're looking to provide that sort of grant and loan relief for customers, really is looking at building resilience and securing livelihoods. And when we talk about resilience, we're looking at the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or from toughness. And it's the ability of a substance or an object to spring back into shape. So we're looking at businesses who, before COVID, were solvent, were able to meet their obligations and so on. So the intention really is to look at those now, because they would have had to have gone through what we call a hibernation period. They would have had to have, they lost their revenue. They either would have kept their staff if they could have. They would have continued to pay their rent if they had to, and other obligations that they would have had to have continued to do. So those ones, we're looking to see how best we can help those who may have had to increase their overdraft right up to the maximum with some sort of grant support. And we're having a structure that will say, okay, if you're a micro business, you can get up to 5,000. If you're a small business, you can get up to 10,000. And you know, so it's structured. We want to be able to understand the business. If they are customers of ours, well, it's easy because we would have already assessed those customers to know, okay, what their plans have been or what their future plans. If it's a new customer, obviously, we have to go through that process of trying to understand the customer a bit better. We are asking for them to meet certain criteria. They must have had, you know, all of their statutory requirements kept up to date so that they're filed for their employees, their NIC and their PAYE and so on. But also, we need them to be in a position to provide us with a simple business plan. We recently did a training of all of our staff with the German Savings Foundation group. And what they did is that they have created what they call a business canvas model. So it prepares a business plan almost in a one page. So it allows persons who may not be the most familiar, but they can access it. So we're going to be doing two things. One, we're going to be arranging for persons to be a part of a business planning session. We know that our friends at SBDC do those things as well. So we encourage persons that if they're submitting to us, they'll have to go through this process. And as I started off at the beginning when I said that we need to know that it's a work in progress, we are going to create a new application form that we're going to put online. And that application form now will allow you to apply for these grant and loan relief program online. It's not going to be ready from Monday, so I don't expect people to...
Because time frame would be one, since it's jump started, people want to know when.
Exactly. So it's something that we're going to say that, listen, it's something that we had to make some adjustments as well, as people would understand. Yes. The same way now that if you go somewhere, they're going to tell you can't sit next to this person, you have to sit further. These are the adjustments that we too have to make, so that instead of persons flocking into our office, we're saying, listen, we want you to be able to look out for the information that we're going to put online, so that when you apply, you're applying online, you're providing us with your business plan online, you're providing us access to some of your financials online, so that we can make an assessment. And then we'll come out to you. We'll come and see your business. We'll come and understand what has happened to you, so we understand the impact on your business to know, okay, as I mentioned earlier, you know, if Liat were a small business and they came to me and said, well, where's the loan and grant relief? I would have to say, well, you know, we have a problem here, because we'd have to look closely at the business model itself. And that's what we want to be able to do. And we're saying that when it came down to looking at agriculture, because that's one of the areas that we think are extremely important, food security. And that's why we're encouraging persons to look at agriculture closely. So be it if you have to get into it personally, if you have to get into it in a commercial way, or even the existing farmers. Before we had COVID, the bank had already engaged in a program where we had a consultant, Dr. Felix Jaria, working with us and through the World Bank, and he came up with an approach of how we should be able to assist the farmers better. And one was the drought situation that we're seeing. And then we're also seeing the areas that the government has been promoting, the 7 crop, that he's saying that there are opportunities in there for persons. So that's why, you know, when we said, okay, we targeted those areas, is to encourage persons to get into that. Then the other thing was the digitalization of your business. Just like we are saying that we have to accept applications online, we're now encouraging that that's the new frontier. We're seeing persons, I just saw an ad recently where someone is saying, if you want to be able to offer your product and your business online, come and do this workshop. And I'm going to try and make it available through our social media platforms for persons to be able to see how to do that. Because that's the new normal. Yeah. The new normal would be you're looking for lunch, you call up. We see Marcy saying if you want to get your groceries, put it online. If you want, you know, so we need to be able to have that linkages where if you are a small farmer and you know you want to be able to access the market, so you can tell them, listen, I expect to have so many pounds of yam or dasheen or whatever it is. And so then the market will be available online as well. So the person who wants to buy that can go online and see, and the linkages are there. So we're trying to strengthen that.
So under this intervention, even though there is grant support, you're indicating that the person is supposed to be coming out of this more resilient. It's not about giving and handing out money, but ensuring that businesses will survive even after they receive those monies. And so the conditions that they need to meet, not very stringent, I guess, or they're too stringent. Let me ask Sabi. Sabina, I have heard Sabi so many times I've called you Sabi.
That's okay.
What do you think of what this is, this particular intervention? Because I think it sounds quite exciting for persons. And I think Mr. Boland, in speaking to him even before this, it was indicating that persons are already calling the office to try to find out how they could qualify for it.
I'll tell you, Glenn, what is most exciting for the private sector right now is that while we are going through this pandemic, none of us know how it's going to end, what is on the other side of the pandemic. I had members calling me and even people who were not members of the association. And here's the thing that they were saying, that after they listened to the launching of that plan last Sunday evening, what it did is that it gave them a lot of hope. Hope because usually when a business is going through financial difficulty, there is a lot that the business owner and the people within the business are going through that would not be obvious to the outside world. The fears are always whether this business will be around to take care of me and to take care of my family. But when people heard the kind of support that was being offered by the government, the kind of support that was entrenched within the plan, what they're saying is it helps them to keep going, knowing that on the other side of the pandemic, that whether they're coming out more profitable than they were before is not even the issue right now. The issue right now is I can continue working hard in my business. I can continue striving and pressing on because I know there is the support that is going to keep my business in place. And that is the most important factor right now for us in the private sector. Business has to remain in place because if we do nothing and businesses close their doors, all of us understand what the repercussions of that is going to be. So as Mr. Boland said earlier, and I said earlier, there are going to be teething problems. We are going to have hiccups along the way, but we have to start somewhere, and I think this is absolutely one of the best places that we can start providing that kind of support, financial support, because that is what one of the biggest challenges always is within the private sector, access to finance. And sometimes the financing is there and we are not able to access it because the requirements for accessing that finance are so, so high. So I think we're absolutely, excited about what it is that's coming.
So before I get to Tommy, Jenna, let me just go back to you. You had mentioned earlier about the electricity. an intervention there, and also you'd mentioned the rental. And I really want you to try to deal with those two areas, because under intervention number 5, there is electricity assistance program for persons adversely affected by COVID-19. I like to hear that because my electricity bill is high. Do I qualify for those as well?
Yeah, I know persons wanted to know a bit more about that initiative when they heard about it last week. As I would have mentioned earlier, government has limited resources, but there are quite a number of persons who have been dislocated. So in all of the measures in the plan, you will notice that there's a clear-cut target audience for each measure to sort of ensure that what government does have available, that it reaches those who have had the maximum effect of COVID-19. So in the case of the electricity assistance program, there is really a targeted pool of persons, and that's your poor and vulnerable. We did not, your poor and vulnerable and your poor and vulnerable who've been affected by COVID-19. We did not want to reinvent the wheel, as it were. So we said if someone has been enrolled in either the income support program or if they've been enrolled in the income support NIC program, that person, we can see what modality we can put in place that person sort of automatically enrolls in there. There are some teething issues in terms of there may be a need for persons to sort of indicate their interest, particularly on the NIC side. But we're looking at persons who are on the poverty list, by way of example, or persons who have been on either one of the income support programs, as I mentioned. So the proposal is really a straightforward one, that we work with our stakeholders, who in this case would be your Ministry of Equity and Lucia in the first instance, to see what can be done, that a credit system can be put in place for those persons for a period of time, whether that be 3 or 6 months, that those persons can actually receive a fixed credit on their
What is the reduction that they could possibly look at?
In the 2020-21 speech, the Prime Minister would have indicated, and Minister of Finance would have indicated that it can be between $100 to $150. We are working with our stakeholders to see what is the best number that gives us widest coverage, but also allows the sustainability of the program, since we are thinking of having this at least for a period of 3 to 6 months. So that is being fine-tuned, but I could advise the public that in short order more will be communicated about that program. But in the main, that is the intent, that those poor, those vulnerable persons, once we have put in place a system to identify them, that we can work with our stakeholders to say, okay, these 5,000, these 10,000 persons, at least for the next 3 months, they are able to receive a credit on their electricity bills.
Now Tommy, this plan is not expected for every intervention to hit the general public, no, from what I'm seeing, all at once. Why was that necessary? Because I think it's also inherent in what the plan says about that you want to also prevent poverty and deterioration of the quality of life. But something like electricity, and I go to you because you're very close to the social aspect of this. What sort of impact do you expect on the ground from this?
Well, certainly I think in terms of, well, you referenced the issue of the social side of things. Glenn, I would like to say that one of the very unfortunate realities is that St. Lucia has, as we speak, within a range of 25% of poverty, yes, in St. Lucia, which is to say that 1 in every 4 St. Lucians can be considered poor. And so you would imagine with COVID, there are further persons who may fall below the poverty line. And so the government needs to do everything within its...
Clarify for me before you continue. What is poor? What does government consider poor? What is...
So on the basis of our 2016 country poverty assessment, any household that consumes less than $6,443 in expenditures in terms of household consumption would be considered poor in St. Lucia for an annualized amount of expenditures. So any household that consumes below that is considered poor.
And we have one in...
So we have 25% of our population. So it's one of the sort of the stark realities that we face with. And so globally, there's a sort of a recognition that you governments must do all within their power.
Yes.
So one, you don't want these persons to go further into poverty. So you may now have them, so you're a deepening of poverty happening, but also the incidence of poverty now. Persons could fall, because you have persons who are vulnerable. They're not necessarily poor, but they're just above the poverty line and considered vulnerable. And a shock to their income, and we know a lot of persons would have lost their jobs, can easily push persons below the poverty line. And so the social interventions here is really get at ensuring that we sort of mitigate and curtail that impact. So one of the things I think the government is doing is that we've expanded the number of households who are currently on poverty assistance, and that has been led by the Ministry of Equity. So as we speak, we have a total of 2,600 give and take on the poverty assistance, where government gives a direct cash transfer to households, and the transfer sizes vary on the household size. If memory serves me right, I think if you're a single household, you get in the range of $215 monthly. If you're a 5 household or more, you would get, I think, 500 or thereabouts. So, but one of the unique things about St. Lucia's social protection system is that there is an undercoverage of poor households. So as it speaks, our indigent level, which is where persons are considered food poor, is about 1.8% of population, which is just about 3,600 households. And so for us, historically, we've been trying to benchmark our coverage to at least that 3,600 households. And so this intervention is trying to at least meet this criteria where we want to capture.
Because you're increasing by 1,000.
We increase it by 1,000 households. And that really is in line with a broader social protection reform that's happening with the World Bank assistance. So additionally, there are households that are receiving other forms of transfers, child disability grants, persons who live with HIV, and also foster care parents. And so what we notice is that there's increased expenditures on these households to provide more support, because some of them may have lost income themselves. Perhaps they would have been working in the hotel sector. And so the government is now topping up the transfers. And we're getting support from the UN system to do this. So certainly, Glenn, I think for us, what we really want to do is to ensure that that 25% is not, does not mushroom out of control. And you can imagine the social implications going forward for that. So and the plan is trying to directly address this.
And I have another question, but Tommy, what you're saying is so interesting. Mr. Boland, Sabina, I want both of you to weigh in on this. How does the private sector also try to help that situation as well? Now that I know you've indicated that a lot of jobs have been lost, but is the private sector also helping to cushion that blow as well for the employees? We have NIC contribution.
Yes, so aside from the income support that is being provided, we know especially within the MSME space, it's always almost family. Meaning, if someone has, for example, a restaurant owner has 10 staff, those staff members end up, becoming that business owner's extended family. Yeah. And so what we see in the private sector is that everything that can be done is done to support those households. And while Tommy was speaking, the thought crossed my mind why it is so important that at this time any support that can be provided is provided, because you do not want people who would have normally been in a position to take care of themselves and their families to fall into the category of poor and needing support from the government. And so the support is extremely important. Private sector, we saw what happened with the telethons at the beginning of this crisis, where the private sector generously pledged huge amounts of money to support the less fortunate among us, to ensure that there was enough, provisions for the frontline staff. What we still see happening, for example, in Vieux-Fort right now, we have two different business owners who have come together, who have pulled resources from some of them from friends overseas, some of them from local business colleagues, and every week they are feeding you know, less, you know, fortunate families within the community. So we have Jolene Hampson from the Reef who does that. And we have another private sector individual, a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Chrétien, who are also doing that. So we see a lot of generosity coming out of the private sector, not only to support their employees, but to provide support for generally people who they think would not otherwise qualify. Some people who are falling between the cracks, who don't, you know, otherwise qualify for any kind of support. Because within the communities, you know, there is this intimacy where everybody knows everybody. And so because of that level of engagement, you know, private sector always, you know, welcomes the opportunity to give back. Yeah. And so we are seeing that happening.
Janai wants to come in before Mr. Boland. Okay.
Just to add on that point, one of the items that would have been discussed, it's not part of this particular plan, but part of the social stabilization plan, was the whole notion of the employee retention credit. I know a lot of persons in the private sector was looking forward to seeing that, and I believe we are in the final stages of actually being able to allow that to come on stream.
If they retain the employees,
where,
they get benefits.
Right, so if they retain, let's say, between 30 and 50%, yeah. the final proposal is that the size of the credit is really based on the number of employees, that the firm had. So I believe that is something that should be coming on the stream in short order. That would reward such instances where an individual or business may have actually retained their staff, notwithstanding some of the revenue pressures that they may have had. So I know the government is eager to roll out that initiative where firms who retain staff can at least receive some sort of credit towards doing so, because a lot of the elements in the plan are really focused on incentivizing behaviors. So that is one such behavior that the government definitely wants to encourage. I know there's been some delay, but we're hoping to have that roll out soon.
Because as was said, this is a three-pronged approach, and this is the third of the interventions. Yeah. So, Mr. Boland, when you spoke earlier, you spoke of businesses that were already solvent. And just based on this discussion, you have persons who want to keep their businesses, but they probably were not as strong. Is the bank willing to work with them or give them that sort of advice that they may be able to also get back on that platform and on their feet so that they could keep their employees? We don't fall below that poverty line and allow persons. Is the bank?
Sure. I mean, we pride ourselves on the level of technical assistance that we provide. Meaning that, you know, we look closely at the business. We are now about to sign an agreement with the European Investment Bank, and it comes with a level of technical assistance from them, whereby we could ask them to look closely at individuals. Part of what we want to be able to do is to make sure that we build resiliency into the program that each small business has. So that specifically for that, so that if they're seeing that, you know, persons are going to be impacted, they can have them retrained, retooled, so that they may even move into a different area. So that if you were employed in the hotel industry, for instance, and you're now thinking that you need to now go in a, you know, if there's a second wave, what happens? Will we go back to where we were in March, April? We're now saying that we now want individuals to be able to look for the training programs that will be offered to be able to then re-gear themselves and you know, survive.
Because if your business was not strong before, really, as you say,
you have to look at alternatives.
Yeah. Okay. So, Jenna, we also were trying to cover we only have short time before the break. Can you talk to also the rental aspect of this?
Right. So one of the other areas that we know is important to the private sector is the whole notion of rent. So what we sought to do was to incentivize landlords who either offered their tenants moratoriums or either offered their tenants reductions in their rent. So I think in the plan, you would have seen reference if you offered your tenant at least a 20% reduction, or if you offered your tenant at least a 3-month or higher moratorium, you actually were able to apply to the Inland Revenue Department for a part waiver of your commercial property taxes. So that is a proposal that we believe would definitely allow for some persons to take advantage, and that would be down to the benefit of your tenants, because rent has been one of the issues persons have argued about in terms of, with me not having much by way of revenues, it is one of these expenses that is difficult to do. So to the extent that the landlord either has the financial wherewithal, or that landlord in turn received a moratorium or a reprieve from their financial institution, to the extent that they paid forward, as it were, then the government is definitely wishing to reward that sort of behavior. And the carrot going along with that is a part wave of the property taxes.
Yeah. So do you see persons who are renting, the landlords going along with this? Have you gotten in terms of positive feedback?
Well, it is one of the proposals that we are hoping to launch soon. It would be something that's going to be administered by the Inland Revenue Department.
Yes.
But I'm pretty sure, and in discussion, some persons have said that they have already done so. So those persons who have already offered that, the proposal is to actually have it backdated a bit so that they can actually benefit. So we are covering the COVID period, whether it be from April through to September. So if an institution would have offered either one of these moratorium or rental reductions during that time period, they would be eligible to qualify. So I think quite a few persons have actually done so, and those persons now can actually receive a benefit for doing that and taking that commendable action.
Okay, great. So we take our second break. When we come back, we continue the discussion. I want to know what you think about the rental aspects of it, and will it really help the businesses? And then we also go into Pillar 2, where Tommy will talk a little more about the aspects of what's covered under there. And there are some juicy aspects for doctors, nurses, that we really want to get into as well. When we return, we continue our discussion. We're discussing the St. Lucia Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan. We'll be back in a moment.
What's in the food you're eating? Do you really even know? All the chemicals and hormones used to accelerate their growth. All the artificial flavoring, sweeteners and colors too. We consume and we don't spare a thought for the damage that they'll do. No, think about the children. Think about the children. How will we save them? Chemicals and GMOs are not the solution. Use organic and join. Excessive agrochemical use, additives, and genetically modified foods are harmful to health and the environment. Join the good food revolution. Grow, buy, and consume organic. A message from Rise St. Lucia and the Ministry of Sustainable Development with funding from the GEF Small Grants Program, UNDP. The good food revolution.
She's been watching, waiting, wondering when the sands of time will give way to a tide of change, and for yesterday and today to become a new tomorrow. For a time when her sun can kiss the cheeks of your loved one, and her stars can twinkle in her honeymoon skies. When her earthly embrace will reassure and calm your soul. And her unique view can change your whole perspective. Proudly, she has risen to meet new challenges and to provide safe harbor to all who reach her shores. For her hopes and dreams still stand, shoulder to shoulder, a precious reminder of experiences yet to come. So, wherever your moments and memories take you, let her sense of adventure set you free. She is St. Lucia. Let her inspire you.
Welcome back to our discussion. We're discussing the St. Lucia Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan with our really esteemed panel, and the discussion has been very fruitful so far. And when we left off, we were speaking about rent and that initiative. Sabina, what does the private sector feel about reduction in rent? Will it significantly help some of the businesses to stay afloat?
If we have to go back to the beginning of the COVID crisis, Glenn, what we saw happening was, landlords and tenants in discussion on how exactly are we going to move forward. Because as you would well imagine, commercial landlords also have huge obligations to the various financial institutions. And most times that is what prevents a landlord from being in a position to provide any kind of assistance to the tenant. So that is why you have strict rental contracts, so that when people don't, fall short on their obligations to pay their landlord, then there are terms in the contract that gives the landlord the right to, get them out of the space and to take paying tenants into the space. But with COVID, it is not a case where people were deliberately not paying their rent. The situation was that money was not coming into the business, and so there was a lot of difficulty in meeting that very, that fixed cost of rent. It is one of the things that a small business owner has no control over, because the price is fixed by the landlord, maybe in discussion, but it's not something that you can do, anything about. And so with this intervention where you have a cost-sharing mechanism, and that I think is what makes this intervention, I think what will make it work, is that it is not left up to the landlord just to say yes or no, I'm doing it or I'm not doing it. Once you can show that you have provided some form of relief, then that is passed on from the government's perspective. And so I think, businesses who are renting their premises, this is welcome news. Why? Because it allows them the ability to stay in place. And that is what we keep stressing, that if you can keep that business in place, it doesn't have to close its doors, then it is taking it a little closer to continuing to survive, to take it over the point of whenever this COVID crisis is going to come around. And so any intervention that is going to assist in that way is something that is going to be welcome by the business community.
I see Janai wants to answer a little bit, but let me just indicate that persons out there interested in the whole rent issue. And a question has come in regarding rent. So somebody asked regarding rent assistance for renters. If my landlord lives overseas and will not be filing for the 10%, can I claim? Not sure if it's not for tenants, right?
No, sadly, it's and at least the aspect of the program that we are speaking of, it's more focused towards landlords and incentivizing landlords to, at least if they are able to, offer some sort of reprieve to their tenants, particularly if they themselves have received some sort of reprieve. So it's what we are speaking out is more focused on those groups of persons.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Tommy, very interestingly, we want to move to pillar number 2. And somebody just asked as well, what's an intervention? Just to explain. Just mention what is the term intervention used there. Because we have 32 interventions. Just to indicate, just for the clarity for some of our
So it's just the policies that the government is implementing, and it's just a sort of another word for policy. You call it an intervention, more or less.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's the way that the government plans to intervene.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And also
rather
this
than
plan
the markets just operate on their own.
Yeah.
So this plan as well, just to indicate, is online at www.govt.lc that persons will peruse, and it will, let me indicate, it will be updated on a regular basis, because as we said, this is a process that we're going through, and as we realize, as the government realizes measures that could be put in place to further assist, we will augment the plan.
Just to add, Glenn, I think as we start to fine-tune each of these interventions, these policies, we will be putting up more information on each of them so that persons get better clarity. As we speak, the plan looks at each of the policies broadly in a sense, but you'll get some more detail as to how you go about and so on, benefiting from each of these interventions.
And talking about benefits, pillar number 2, it deals with fast-track, shovel-ready capital investment projects. And I see this pillar is rooted in the St. Lucia Medium-Term Development Strategy 2020 to 2023. Both the private and public sectors will be involved in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic by fast-tracking the commencement of key projects and accelerating the commencement of ongoing projects. Can you explain some more? What is shovel-ready? Some people are asking what does shovel-ready mean, and what is entailed on that particular intervention and initiative?
Yes, Glenn. So, Pillar 2, which, like you rightly said, is fast-tracking shovel-ready capital investment projects. In terms of shovel-ready, I'll answer that first. Essentially, there's just some criteria within which we say, okay, a project is ready for implementation. So one, the financing agreement around these projects should have already been, to a large extent, finalized. The plans, the approvals from the requisite government agencies should have already been obtained. And all the necessary things that you would need to start mobilizing and starting a project is already, to a large extent, in place. So perhaps you may need a project implementation unit to manage a particular project. Off the top of my head, the Millennium Highway West Coast Rehabilitation Project is one of the flagship projects that we have in our medium-term development strategy, which also forms part of this particular intervention, the fast tracking. And so you need to actually have your PIU in place, you need to have your designs and all of these things in place to start the process going. And so the intention for the government is to sort of push these along a lot quicker and to start them as soon as possible. So for instance, the UK project, the UK Millennium West Coast project, the information coming from the line agency, that is the Ministry of Infrastructure, is that anywhere between October and November we'll start breaking ground in the project, and we'll start seeing work commencing as soon as possible. Just to say that this particular pillar is perhaps the largest in terms of the resources. It's close to 400 million. And you'd appreciate that it's sizable in a sense because of its construction-related projects. And so a lot of it, again, I would like to really say that it's, we've already financed these. A lot of them are from concessional terms. The UK in particular, the Millennium Highway project, is really, to a large extent, a grant. £43 million, was given to us as official development assistance from the UK government. And we see that is going to really absorb a lot of the unemployment that we see here. Pillar 1 really, as Janai would have elaborated, look at sort of incentivizing the behavior of firms, giving them capital injection. But Pillar 2 really looks at government directly intervening and providing that sort of injection.
And the private sector.
And the private sector as well. Under there, we also have the public sector procurement, where the government has one of its policy tools is expenditures, how it expends the revenue that it gets, and so the government, there is a sort of policy around that the government should be, before they purchase any sort of goods or services, that they should look internally into the domestic economy before going outwards. That has not really been enforced per se so much, and so the government is now trying to say, okay, let's start to utilize this particular policy. So case in point, if you were to say, let's say a hotel, well, perhaps not a hotel, let's say a hospital is trying to procure beds, maybe you would want to look at getting beds from Lubeco first before you could go outside. And if there are specific requirements in terms of the specifications, maybe having a dialogue with Lubeco and other producer manufacturers to meet the specification. But not just saying, well, you can provide this and we go outside. So it's a sort of way of stimulating that sector, which indirectly would now maybe result in more jobs or retaining jobs, and like Janai was talking about earlier. So that's the thinking around.
So this is in line, Tommy, just to put a pin here a little bit. This is in line with the Love St. Lucia campaign. I'm seeing a linkage, direct linkage, where we're encouraging buy local. This is just a rebranded buy local campaign.
Yeah, certainly you would want to have policy cohesion and congruence, and this is, we thought that it would, if you're going to have a Love St. Lucia campaign, you certainly would want to, you're asking the private sector to, and the public to do that. The government needs to also show that it's also committing to buying from the domestic economy before looking outward.
Yeah, Sabina, that would really ramp up manufacturing and production of local goods, hopefully create new businesses, new initiatives, and innovative ideas on the ground. What do you say to that?
Okay, so as far as, well, if we are connecting the Love St. Lucia campaign with this pillar, what we see is that government is continuing its support of agencies like the Bureau of Standards, Export St. Lucia, which are the key agencies that are providing support for manufacturers and other service providers. So what we know in St. Lucia, I don't know if you remember the last panel that Margaret Daisy was on, that St. Lucia manufacturers are producing, you know, according to the standards that are needed at an international level, and there is export readiness presently for the goods that are being produced here. So you have the Bureau of Standards providing the HACCP certification and ISO certifications. And so because of that support that government provides to those agencies, what you find is that the products are already being produced at those standards. And I think with this move to ensuring that government buys from local firms and from service providers, it is actually going to ensure that you see activity in the local economy. And for manufacturers, what it means is that there will be now a market, which is the government, for those goods that they are producing. Same for the creative industries, the ICT professionals, especially the ICT professionals, because if we are moving towards digitalization of our various firms and MSMEs, we have the capacity within St. Lucia. And if you speak to the people in the services sector, the SLCSI, they will tell you that we have the skills and we have the talent and the capacity within the ICT sector to be able to meet the needs that businesses would have right now. So I think all in all, Glenn, it's very, very promising what we are seeing with the interventions on the part of the government, what it is that the various support agencies of government have been able to do over the past years in supporting businesses. I think we are right at the point where all of us can run with, you know, all of these plans that we are putting in place and ensure that businesses can remain in place, you know, while we are riding out this crisis.
And I see opportunities for SLDB and the banking sector, because the fast track projects would require some subcontractors to have ready access to cash to be able to capitalize on this. Is the bank in tune with everything that is happening there? And
Definitely. I mean, this is this is a traditionally a strong area for the St. Lucia Development Bank. Yeah. We have, you know, been providing bridge financing for a number of these projects throughout, and even more so, what we're looking at now closely is to try and see if we can give some sort of rate reduction, particularly in this area. We had a meeting not too long ago with the Department of Economic Development, where, you know, specifically they pointed out that some of our charges may be an annual charge, whereas they're saying that the project is only for 3 months. And if it is a short-term shovel-ready project, they would like us to look closely at the rate. And we have agreed that we would do so. In fact, we have a board meeting coming up this week, which is where it will be raised. That will give the relief and make it more easily accessible. We do provide financing in this area up to $250,000 for contractors, you know, for these small works projects.
Yeah. So I'm going to just remain on you for a little while. There's a question that came in from the platform. What initiatives are in place for startup businesses who are technology-based? My business is a startup with technology-based services and software for public and private sectors. And that takes me, Mr. Boland, to intervention number 8, which is the low-cost working capital injection program. Can you explain that as well? Probably there is something there for somebody who's interested in startups, that intervention.
Sure. So a lot of the time, the requirements for like that person who is sending in that note, you know, is for us to see what specifically his business intends to do, so that we have a better understanding. Yes, he may be a lot of the time you find, especially the young people, have tremendous ideas, And those ideas now need to be taken and put into a context of a business so that they understand the marketing, they understand the recording.
They have a proper plan.
They have to have a proper plan. And that's why we have teamed up with agencies like SBDC. We have, a memorandum of understanding with them so that even, for instance, if you need to understand your market, if you want to target export, we have, contacts that we'll put you in touch with at Export St. Lucia so that they can do. We are part of a committee with the Invest St. Lucia, and they're about to roll out an incubator and accelerator program where it's going to start off by being virtual. So small businesses like that can get the assistance that they need to be able to say, okay, how do I put together a proposal to come to the bank? I mean, for the person who is asking that question, again, we need to understand how much it is that they're looking for, what it is they intend to do, if it is that they need to be. A lot of the time, the big hurdle is collateral. And we know everybody says, oh boy, SLDB, I can't get anything because I don't have the collateral. Well, to an extent, that's not really quite accurate because we take bills of sale on equipment. We make it easy for you to be able to do so. We take guarantors up to a certain amount that you can come with a guarantor and he says they'll pledge for you for $40,000 and we'll be able to provide that type of loan.
So they need a conversation with SLDB, start the businesses.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen the areas, like I said, the areas that we are in tune with what's happening now in that we know we have to look at food security. We know the government has the shovel-ready projects that everybody now needs to say, okay, where is the revenue in St. Lucia? The revenue used to come from the hotel industry. That's not there right now. So we have to see, okay, if it is that the government has funding for projects, that's the area that we know that every St. Lucian has the ability to try and see how best they can tap into that. If you don't feel that you are sufficiently trained in an area, speak to someone. The key is communication so that they can tell you. If it is that you have to be referred to the National Skills Development Center, who I know they are running programs for electricians, they're running programs for crop production, they're running programs for agro-processing. They have spoken to us and we are trying to speak to them to say, okay, let's have something to see if we can get our contractors certified so that you will be able to, if you come and you say, I have no experience, but I'm certified because I've gone through a course, then they look at you more closely to see if that, you're able to get a contract.
So there's a lot in for startup businesses, but they need to start that conversation, and also they need to have the house in order, and there is help to do that as well. Tommy, I'm still on your section, and we have the assistance for persons who are developers of 5 or more lots. How does that work? Some persons were asking even before this discussion, why 5 or more? Who could afford 5 or more right now? But as we said earlier, this is not for everyone to benefit at the same time. You have targeted groups. So how does this intervention going to really help stimulate and push that sector?
Well, so I think...
And also tied in as well with the import of... For more.
So the intervention, the policy, is really geared at stimulating housing construction, but also to try to get that sort of critical mass, Glenn, because you may have one house, but I think the thinking is to sort of have more, that sort of maybe 4 or 5 houses, 5 or more, but you'll understand that there's more employment that's created from this sort of thing. Yes. So I think the real result there is to sort of get more employment creation and for assistance. To the extent that it's, I know persons may say, well, it's a sort of at odds with the sort of Love St. Lucia and so on, but to the extent that the inputs in building these houses can be procured locally, I think that it would, there would be some sort of
because there's a waiver of import duty for the items, but I'm thinking if it runs in sync with what is being said, only if you cannot get the items, you should go beyond
so I think we have to sort of kind of refine this particular policy with the Department of Commerce and so on. But ultimately the intention is to get more person absorb that excess supply of labor that we've had in the economy as a result of the job losses that we've seen in COVID, Glenn. So I don't see, I think that as we unroll and implement this, it will certainly, you know, we'll get some more details and clarity as to how it's going to. I know the question regarding, you know, why, if I have
if I'm building one house, why can't I get,
you know, and so on, you know, so. Again, the raison d'etre really is to just get that sort of critical mass and to absorb as much persons. That is not to say that this particular policy is cast in stone. I think one of the things that we're realizing is that as we start to implement the policies, we have to be agile and nimble. And if there is a genuine case for amending or tweaking a particular intervention, I think that the committee is more than open to looking at these, given that there's clear justification for doing that.
And I think just on that point, one of the reasons why that would have come up was if you were to look at the housing market, I think some of the studies from as early as 2010 and whatnot would have estimated that there's quite a sizable housing deficit. So I think the genesis of that proposal that Tommy has been speaking about is there scope for government to take measures now that can treat with the size of that housing deficit. I know issues related to construction and stimulating construction have always been fraught with a lot of challenges and a lot of difficulties. And I think what the approach this time is really on how do you tier and sort of scale the incentive to match the level of expenditures going forward. I know the Department of Commerce is working on how they can fine-tune that scaling, but I think that was one of the issues in terms of the 5 or more, is to really treat with the housing deficit. And it may be time for us to really look the density in terms of how we build. A lot of our structures now are single-family units. Is there scope to sort of change that modality towards more condominium type structures? And if there is scope to do that, should the government work towards incentivizing that sort of high density, low footprint type construction?
Instead of 5 properties, if you go up
blocks.
Yes.
So those are issues.
That's there.
Yeah, yeah. So those are issues that came up in the discussion, and I know there is some fine tuning, but the thinking behind it is really along those lines.
So we may see some alterations, some iterations within there.
So if I could just add, I mean, it lays the groundwork for something that that we at the Development Bank are passionate about, which is green affordable housing for all. And we will see this roll out. I see Tommy smiling because it's something that we are, looking to see how we could have a holistic approach to addressing the housing situation in St. Lucia. And we think that this area will actually allow people around the entire island to be mobilized. When we think about Sir Arthur Lewis's model, where he said with an unlimited supply of labor, we can achieve great things. And it's for us now to be able to identify the capital, apart from the labor, that needs to go along with it. For instance, with the 5 houses, I mean, I'm sure my banking colleagues, and we have a meeting coming up this week, will start to think about what package I can put together that will allow persons to access that particular funding to carry out those 5 house builds. One key thing would be, okay, do I have 5 persons who are going to buy those houses? And if you come to me and say you have 5 people who are going to buy those houses, and you're the contractor, I'm saying, where do we start? Yeah, so those are the types of things we're looking at.
Even before you build.
Yeah, yes. And we spoke about shovel-ready projects, and one of the things that the Development Bank is looking at closely is coming up with what we would call bundles, a package which is a bundle. So we have models that have already identified how to make a particular business viable. So those models include, if you have a broiler business and layers, we have a model that takes care of that. We have models that speak to pork production, to various livestock rearing. So, when somebody thinks, well, where do I start? How do I get into this business? Come and speak to us, and we'll tell you, okay, if it is that you have to go into the pork rearing business, we know offhand you have to have a certain number of animals for it to be viable. we look and say, okay, can I start off with three pigs? Maybe not.
Yes.
You need to be able to have a certain number that when you start to slaughter, depending on how they weight, if it's by the carcass or if it's live, you then have to understand, okay, what price you're going to get for that. And we have broken it down so that we can identify the models which would be almost shovel ready for individuals. Nice. So for food production, we have that ability. For it covers quite a number of areas that we have the ability to look at to say, okay, these are areas that if you would like to get into, speak to us so that we can show you how best.
And that actually intervention number 19.
Glenn, before you continue, if I can just touch a little on a point that Tommy was making a while ago. If we go back to the Love St. Lucia campaign, I think there may be a little bit of misgiving on the part of the public as far as providing incentives for people who want to develop 5 or more houses, so they're getting waivers on importation of construction materials and stuff like that. But what we must remember is that when you're building a home for someone, you are not necessarily importing, a lot of that construction material from outside. Whereas, let us say, a project like the airport would need maybe specialized material, but for a home, you can find a roof in St. Lucia, you can find the building blocks in St. Lucia, you can find the floors, the kitchen cupboards. We have factories in V4 that make those, we have factories for the windows, so I think this is very exciting because what it'll do, not only will it provide more jobs during this time where a lot of people have been displaced, but it is also going to provide that stimulation within the local construction, the providers of construction materials like a roof and stuff like that. It is going to provide, that stimulation in that section of the economy. So I just wanted to touch on that.
If I may also add, Glenn, I think the sort of constraint where you say, okay, a developer who has the capital to build 5 out. I'm not sure if perhaps persons could, maybe just an idea, pool if we have 3 or 4 of us who are interested in building our own personal homes, and we could sort of pool resources and so on. And so I don't think it's just because I know personally.
That would have to be something because I think a developer is classed differently.
but I'm just saying, in a sense that
probably
because I know there's some persons are saying, but why just to developers? If I'm in a position to build my home now, why is it that I'm sort of being pigeonholed in that particular category and not as a developer? So maybe it's a creative
I think
way.
it's a certain connotation for a developer. But we're going to be going to a break. But Janai, intervention number 9, we're going to be talking just in line with what Mr. Boland was indicating, the microfinance loans for households to diversify into small and micro enterprises and cottage industries. Because that sounds very interesting. That's actually persons who actually have their own homes, have the small businesses, and government is providing that sort of assistance. We'll talk about this, and we're going to talk about the exciting portion, the vehicles and the waivers. I think many persons are waiting to hear this. So we're discussing the St. Lucia Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan. When we come back, we'll be taking your calls. We're also asking you to send any questions to us on askmeanythingntn@gmail.com. When we come back, I will repeat that information, so join us on the other side of the break.
We at war with a virus, ready to harm us. Panic is not the answer. We can win this together. Often use hand sanitizer, better yet use soap and water.
We must protect each other if we are to beat this corona.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for St. Lucia. Together let us win this war. Be a soldier, together we can beat this corona.
So you don't become the next case. Avoid touching your face. I'm sure you've been told so. Handshakes and hugging are up, no.
Advice is you to please. Cover your mouth and your nose if you cough or sneeze.
Practice social distancing and avoid large social gatherings.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for St. Lucia. Together let us win this war. St. Lucia, be a soldier. Together we can beat this corona.
For further information, please contact the hotline at 311 or the Bureau of Health Education at 468-5349.
Welcome back to our panel discussion. We're discussing the St. Lucia Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan, and we have really an exciting panel that have been discussing all the issues, even past the plan as well. We open the phone lines from now. Our phone number is 468-2162. You could also send us your questions via askmeanythingntn@gmail.com. So before we get the calls, hopefully, Jenna, I really wanted you to touch on, not Jenna, I think you deferred to Tommy now.
Yes, I did.
Intervention number 19, the microfinance loans for households to diversify into small and micro enterprise and cottage industries. What are the requirements to access these loans, and what are some of the guidelines and qualifying criteria?
So this particular initiative, Glenn, will be implemented by the Bell Fund, and it's really under the social pillar 3. The thinking behind it is that a substantial amount of persons would have lost their jobs, Glenn, and we should not just wait for the hotel sector to resuscitate and so on. If there's someone realize, you know what, I'm a pastry chef at the hotel, and I can go into my own business,
small
catering and so on. There should be a pathway, an avenue to do that, and so we've recognized that, hey, we can provide some small loans, and I think the amount is not beyond $5,000, just to give you your sort of, to get your basic equipment.
That'll be soft loans as well?
Soft loans, and to a large extent, the Bell Fund loans, and I don't have them off the top of my head now in terms of they are generally very low interest, and they don't put a high emphasis on collateral. You just need signatories and so on. The thinking here again, because one of the challenges that Bell Fund historically has provided loans to, what we would call maybe poor households and so on, and we're thinking now persons who are non-poor but who don't have the collateral to go into these areas, and so the intention is to provide a total of $500,000 in the first instance to get persons and to provide that liquidity to go into cottage industries and small and micro businesses, and I think that given that the skills that a lot of them would have acquired in their various fields, they can now start to go into business for their own, and that's what we really want to engender from this particular initiative.
Exciting, very exciting. We're having fun, but the time is going. The exciting part, I think we have a number of our frontliners interested in knowing about, something very interesting that the Prime Minister has brought up, which is duty-free concessions on vehicles. Jenna, I know we have some new information that's really hot out of the press tonight, and you could probably address and speak to. And this is really intervention number 21, duty-free concessions on vehicles to essential public service officers, nurses, police, fire officers, doctors. Explain this a little bit.
Well, I think one of the things that was recognized, particularly at the height of the lockdowns and what have you, was the whole notion of transportation and the ability of some of the essential workers to really be able to respond and offer their services in a period where you had a lockdown situation and your traditional avenues of transportation were not readily available. So I think in recognition of that, and during the consultative sessions, you had this sort of push towards seeing what could be done, at least for this target audience in the first instance. I know there are quite a number of proposals with respect to transportation on a whole throughout the island. But this is an initiative that is really tailored towards a particular cohort, as you would have mentioned, your nurses and what have you, to allow them to really respond to instances where we would require their services in short order, and you don't necessarily have the traditional avenues available. So I believe the proposal is really speaking to, initially we had mentioned new vehicles, but I think there is also some discussion with respect to used vehicles as well.
Yeah, up to a maximum of 5 years old. Yeah. And what is just coming is that the exemption will be 60% reduction if the vehicle is not new and is imported. Yeah. Really gives a wider field. I mean, the Prime Minister has indicated that much. So, and I think it's new vehicles up to a retail sale price of $125,000.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's pretty exciting for any chance that communications persons are called essential.
So maybe
just before we have a call, looks like the vehicle issue has excited us.
Sure.
Caller, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
We're
Good
not hearing you in
evening.
studio.
Yeah, can you hear me?
One second. We're just going to fix this small issue.
Can you hear me now?
Just barely.
Hello?
Hello?
Oh, hi.
Hi, yeah. I'm calling from Georgia, state of Georgia.
Okay.
I'm St. Lucian. But, I mean, I listen to you guys there, okay? And it begs a lot of questions. Yeah, economic recovery, which is good at this time, but shouldn't some kind of mechanism, or shouldn't we go back to all the wastage that happened before COVID-19 in terms of all the borrowing that went, all the monies that are being given out, you know, and then the people are just struggling. And I heard you guys mention about vehicle, these matters to people at the time while they're not working.
Okay, so we lost you for a little bit. Could you just make your point again very quickly so we could get it?
Okay, what I'm calling about is I'm talking about all these monies that has been borrowed in the state name, all these over $1 billion. All the CIP monies, is unaccountable for. Okay? Yes, you have to put an economic recovery in place. I agree with that. But shouldn't we go back to all these monies that have been borrowed in the state name? How is the state? What plans, what things will there be in place to repay all these millions of dollars that have been borrowed in the state name and nothing to show for it? What economic recovery? How do you go about that?
Okay, so I think we got...
Plus,
yes?
Eh? And then plus now the IMF loan, all these money. So how do you put an economic recovery together for all this?
Okay, so thank you very much for your question. I think in essence is really, this is what we're doing here. But Jedi, would you like to just mention in a sense why the plan is put together again? Probably he came in a little late.
I think one of the issues he was referring to, caller, is the extent to which we would even be in a position to repay all of these monies that he's referencing there. And he would have referenced the IMF rapid credit facility. Fortunately for the state, those resources that we have gotten, whether it be from the IMF and what have you, given the recognition that COVID is going to be with us for some time, a lot of those loans and what have you do come with some grace period, and they are relatively concessional. So the ability to repay, given that the repayment is off to the medium term, when the expectation is that the economy would have rebounded relative to where it is now, and that the government would have a stronger footing with respect to paying those monies.
Excellent. So we have another call. Caller, come in.
Yes.
Hi, we could hear you.
All right. What I wanted to find out with reference to the concession on vehicles. I mean, we said it's exciting, but from what I'm understanding, there's a criteria. The gentleman earlier on, he stated that, it was for people, transportation important in the period. But the question is, are we saying that people that meet the criteria are the only ones that are responding to COVID currently? Shouldn't that, since we are doing it for the people
the frontliners
that are working in the front line,
yes,
shouldn't be for all of them? And why is there a limitation? Thank you.
I don't think
Well, I think that was explained earlier, but as I said to Mr. Leos, I was asking for myself as well, communications persons, because the plan, as we said, the target audience isn't for everyone at the same time. But since it's for the panel,
I think what the caller, I think there was a misunderstanding. Janai was I think Janai was giving what brought about the need for that intervention is that there was a recognition that some frontline workers were having difficulty getting themselves to work because they did not possess a vehicle. I don't think you intended to say that it only applies to frontline workers without a vehicle.
They were also being stigmatized as well as a result of working at the facility.
So it applies to all frontline workers is what I understood.
And for all aspects of the recovery plan, each element of the recovery plan really has a target audience that it is focused on. Ideally, and it has come up in many of the discussions, persons have asked to broaden the base of the initiative, whether it be with rent, whether it be with credit to businesses and what have you. But there are a multitude of things that the government is really trying to do, and what we are focused on is where we are seeing the greatest need to put the limited resources there, and with a hope that going forward you are able to, if not expand, or at least put in place new policies and whatnot. But each of the proposals in the plan are catered to a particular target audience.
Yeah.
And what happens?
Yeah. So we have another call just before, and so it looks like the vehicle issue is a really exciting issue.
No, we don't want.
Caller, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Good evening to the panel.
Good evening.
I am particularly interested in the South, and I am happy to see that the people of the South is being represented at the table. Now, Mr. Boland mentioned about tourist dollars not coming in, and so that on the Pillar 2, the shovel-ready projects, the capital investment projects, he particularly made mention of the Millennium Highway. I would think that the development of the Hiwanora International Airport would fall into that category. And as far as the Southern Business Association is concerned, what I want to know is whether there are any provisions or whether the association is advocating for people in the South to get jobs on that project. If there is a quota of jobs that would go to people in the South, because I could imagine with the Millennium Highway, people coming from the South, it's very much unlikely that they would be getting jobs up there. So if we have a capital investment project like the airport, whether the business association in the South is advocating that we get a quota of jobs reserved for the people in that part of the island.
Get prioritized. Thank you, caller. I think we've got the question. So ask specifically, and then we have one of the economists.
Well, I would like to thank the caller for the question. I'm very happy that the caller actually took the first step to do that. Maybe I would have been out of place to say that we want a quota of the jobs going to workers in the South. But I absolutely agree with the caller. And the Southern Business Association takes its advocacy efforts very, very, very seriously. I guess that's why, the South is represented here at the table this evening. Because I think what we are seeing is that with all of the displacement that has happened as a result of closures in the international markets, is that we have a lot of businesses who depended on the airport for survival now being closed. We have car rental agencies who are members of the association whose cars are sitting, at home, and what we know is going to happen is that those cars are going to deteriorate and going to disrepair, the longer this continues. And so I absolutely agree, and I absolutely support the caller's perspective. So I'm going to allow Shania to give us some feedback on that. Yeah.
Thanks again for the call, and Ms. Varma for your advocacy. I think I definitely understand the gist of the question in terms of ensuring that the capital works that are done, that you really see widespread participation and benefit. And I know that the road program is quite a comprehensive one and covers quite a number of areas of St. Lucia. So I believe there would be opportunities for all segments of society and all residents, whether it be north, south, or what have you, to participate in some of those projects. Where there is one particular project that is sufficiently large that you may want to actually explore having some sort of system, as the caller would have made mention to, I think that is something that can be looked at. I'm sure the relevant authorities, whether it be at the Department of Infrastructure and what have you, are listening, and I think it's something that can be looked at, and we can speak to it going forward.
I know you want to come in, Tommy, but we have a caller online just because this is the segment. Caller, are you there?
Are you there?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm there.
Yes, you could go ahead.
Panel, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah. A gentleman called from Georgia.
From Georgia?
And he made a comment, and I think you all should have addressed it. He actually mentioned, I think I'll duck the question, he actually mentioned that the CIP funds were not accounted for.
Okay.
I know that government economists there and whatnot, and I think that question should be answered because we need to let our people in the diaspora know the truth.
On the issue, caller, of the
and
CIP.
Secondly, I just want to answer another gentleman asked about he asked about the quota of workers for the South because there is so much development taking place in the South, and he made mention of the airport in particular.
Well, and I think this panel may not be able to speak to the quota.
And I want to just let the caller know.
Who caller?
That there are 54 acres being hoarded at this present time, and the contractor is actually from the South. The entire job has been given to the South. So yes, so I want to refresh. I want to put his mind at ease to tell him a lot of the workers will be coming from the South.
Okay.
So you answered the question for us.
Yes. Yeah. I don't think the CIP funds are part of what we're discussing because, as you mentioned earlier, that government has looked at everything. I don't know if you care to repeat any information there.
I would have just mentioned that a lot of the expenditures made, whether it be from any of the government heads, a lot of that would have been articulated in whether it be the 2020-2021 budget appropriation bill or previous budget bills. So a lot of that information is contained in there. Even when the caller would have made mention of the IMF, RCF funds, how those are budgeted and how those are allocated, references made in the budget documents as well.
Yeah. Tommy, you wanted to come in just before I take the call?
Yeah, I think the caller would have answered the question.
Okay.
But also just to see that we as part of the monitoring of this plan, the intention is to not just look at implementation of the capital projects, but the extent of employment created under these projects, and perhaps even look at maybe where that the concentration of the employed is coming. So hopefully we will get a better indication.
And you'll have this monitoring framework that's built into the resilience plan.
Yeah.
So Bolan, we have a caller on, so just very...
Well, just quickly, I wanted to say, for the benefit of all, that when we talked about the vehicles earlier, that electric vehicles are duty-free.
Yeah.
And therefore, everybody has access to them. And we finance electric vehicles at the development bank. So, when we talk about it being specific to a particular target, the government has made provision for everyone.
So more persons could benefit
if they want to buy
and
electric,
from hybrid vehicles as well.
Buy electric vehicle.
Okay, so we have a call online. Caller, thank you for waiting.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, I'd like to ask if there's any provisions for young entrepreneurs, probably in real estate, or maybe you want to do like Airbnb or something like that. That's a big market. Can maybe help with that or get any assistance with the plan and with the banks?
Yeah.
With the bank.
Thank you very much.
Sure. I mean, Right now, Airbnb may be a little difficult for us to finance just because most Airbnbs would have closed. Those that are opening back have to open under the strict protocol. So it would be you looking at a business plan that says, okay, I want to be able to have my Airbnb, which will be operational maybe from January. That will then, see how best your loan can be serviced. But we welcome you to come to the bank. We have a lot of incentives for young persons to be able to access some venture type capital as well as the low cost loans that we're dealing with now.
So, we have that conversation with the bank as quickly as possible, see what benefits.
It is for the benefits of all.
So a question came in, and administrative staff of the hospitals, they're not included in this. They're now interested because are they classed as essential workers? For now, we have a strict doctor, nurse, fire officer, police officer. I should have joined one of those. I should have joined. Yeah. So, Tommy, I didn't know if you wanted to come in on anything before because I saw you were trying to.
No, that's all. That's fine.
Okay. So the incentives are also for the minibus sector and the taxi sector. But I thought that was always there. Could you explain why this falls on them?
They typically had concessions that range between 50 and 60% based on whether it was a new or used minibus or what have you. I think going forward, what has been put in place is that those percentages have been raised to as high as 100%, and that the time period has been lengthened to at least over the next 2 to 3 years thereabout, because there is a recognition that in the immediate term, there would not, particularly with respect to your taxi operators or whatnot, there would not be much ability to uptake in the immediate term. But where you do see some rebound going forward in the tourism industry and related industries, that they would be in a position to take advantage of that. And I believe the plan also speaks to some of the waivers with respect to the permits and what have you. So that is also a feature of the plan as well.
Okay, and also you expect that with those incentives that the new car market will have this jump start, because currently I'm not sure how many vehicles are being rolled out because persons are looking for more incentives in order to access it. Could anybody speak to what you think that will do to the economy in terms of putting those incentives for those two sectors, which are big sectors, and how many persons that you think might qualify or might benefit under them?
Yeah, I think if you were to look at just the cohort that has been mentioned in the plan, the 4 or 5 categories mentioned, that roughly covers just under 2,000 persons who are broadly eligible. A lot of those persons may or may not wish to participate, but you're looking at roughly 2,000 odd persons thereabout.
Yeah,
so,
and in the case of the transport sector, I think we have about 1,300 omnibus operators. Yeah. And I know that there's a sort of a thrust towards modernizing the fleet and the service that has been provided. And so I know that the NCOPT in particular has been lobbying and saying that they want to strengthen that and the service that's provided. And so this comes at a very opportune time for them also, Glenn.
Okay, so this has been a really good discussion. There are a lot more things that we could talk about. However, we're almost out of time. I'm going to give you some time to just 1 minute each to just indicate what this plan you think can do, will do, and how you hope persons will be able to participate.
Yes, so from the private sector position, what I can already see happening, because these are the calls that were already coming, how is it that we will be able to take advantage of this, all of those interventions? And as I said earlier, we are very pleased with the level of support that is being provided by the government to the private sector. And so over the course of the next few weeks, we are hoping that the processes are going to be in place so that people can actually take advantage of, like Mr. Boland said, those applications are going to be done online and people are actually going to be able to apply Like you said earlier, Glenn, the entire plan is online on the government's website.
Yes.
So it is now incumbent upon all of us as St. Lucians to make it our business to familiarize ourselves with the plan, what it is that is in there for us, and then, begin calling and reaching out to the various agencies to see how it is we can benefit, because this is an opportunity that the government of St. Lucia is providing support, and we have to take advantage of it if we are going to see any kind of recovery happening in the economy in the short to medium term.
You called Mr. Boland's name, so Mr. Boland, I'm good to you there.
Sure. So, the St. Lucia Development Bank is prepared to play its role. As I mentioned, we had gone through our strategic planning session, and one of the key was our customer service. We know that at times that we do fall down, but we have looked at it closely where we can put a plan in place to ensure that there's a smooth access to funding. The essence is that we want to be able to help persons to start their business. We want them to be able to prepare their plan. We want them to be able to access the markets and get the training that they need. So it's a collaborative approach that we are spearheading along with the government to ensure that persons have the ability to access the funding as and when they need it.
Excellent. And Janai,
thank you. Thanks again for allowing me to participate. COVID has really been an unprecedented economic and socio-economic event. And the government is really focused on doing two things: ensuring that your poor and vulnerable are given the level of assistance that they need to prevent them slipping into further rungs of poverty, and to also give your private sector, whether it be through our assistance to the SLDB, which they can then lend to the private sector, to support those two entities, your poor and vulnerable and the private sector. To the extent that we could do that, that really is what's going to draw the floor, as it were, under this whole socio-economic impact. In the absence of treating of those two groupings, you would have really a collapse, both in terms of confidence going forward and in terms of the economic realities. So the plan is really focused on preventing that collapse, stabilizing, offering targeted assistance where we believe it to be necessary and where we have the resources to do so. And that sort of multifaceted approach, we are only talking about 3 of the pillars at this panel. There will be subsequent discussions where we refer to the other 3. But I definitely want the public to understand that when you look at the totality of what is being done, it's really a multifaceted approach to sort of respond to something that has been unprecedented, and you could not have imagined that 2020 would have turned out like this. I know usually it was referred to as the year of vision and what have you. Everyone was racing towards 2020 vision. We all had 2020 plans, but look how it turned out.
Tommy, no one could have imagined. You have the final few seconds.
Thank you, Glenn, and it was a pleasure being here this evening. I think my esteemed panel pairs here have really, put the icing on the cake, in particular, Janai. For us, I think the core committee who has put this together, I think, is one thing to put in the plan together. I think for us now, our focus is now on implementation. Yeah. And so the next couple of weeks, we'll be working seriously to ensure that we are able to refine, fine-tune, and ultimately safeguard the lives of every single St. Lucian. I think the theme for this plan is moving from the pandemic to recovery with collective action. And so I really urge every St. Lucian to peruse the document. It's for every one of us. I think there's something in there for everyone. And I really want persons to participate. I had a unique experience. My barber said, he's not going to participate in the income support. I was like, why? And I had to sit with him and fill the form for him. And so sometimes, those who can assist, also just reach out and provide that sort of support and indicate. But like Jonai said, it's unprecedented, and I think the government's plan here is a bold and ambitious commitment to at least recovering this economy to what post-COVID and make it a more resilient economy. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you very much. And also, in line of the thanks, let me just indicate that thanks also goes out to the Government of St. Lucia, the Department of Finance, the multi-sectoral committee working for, I think, almost 2 months while the lockdown and everything was happening and social distancing. And the technical committee put this thing together, trying best to appreciate everybody's contributions and see how we could put this together. So we've been discussing the St. Lucia Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan, specifically the first 3 pillars: stimulating the economy, fast-tracking shovel-ready projects, and strengthening the social protection programs. The aim is to move St. Lucia from pandemic to recovery with collective action, and that has been spoken of quite a bit here. Let me thank you. Let me thank the panel for being very open and accepting to be here. And we will have part 2 of this discussion, discussing the next 3 aspects of the recovery plan, pillar 4 to 6. And this will be, you will hear the dates as we plan it out. So thank you very much. I am Glenn Simon, your moderator, and join us again when we have another discussion on the St. Lucia Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan. See you later.